Welcome everyone to our first People First talk. My name is Radha Ruparel. I head leadership development work at Teach for All, but today I'm here as a member of the People First community, like all of you. And so I'm very excited to welcome you all to our very first People First talk. For those of you who are new to the community, just a word about the People First initiative. So this initiative was formed with the belief that we need to prioritize leadership that's inherently collective, that brings diverse people together, that enables local leadership if we wish to achieve sustainable development. And so we're going to have this series of talks to learn from people within and outside of the People First community. And really the purpose of these talks is to explore this idea of what does this collective leadership look like? And then also, how do we develop this type of leadership? So this is going to be a space to really learn from one another. You can tell it's quite an intimate setting because most of us are doing some work in the leadership development space. So we can get deep, ask real questions, and really have a chance to learn from one another in the community. So today we get the opportunity to learn from one member of our community, Fred Swaniker. Fred leads the African Leadership Group. That includes a number of different initiatives, the African Leadership Academy, the African Leadership University, and many more. And they have a big, bold vision of developing 3 million leaders in Africa by 2025. So we're going to get to learn a little bit from Fred about this vision and his lessons around how do you develop leadership. And to host that conversation, we have another incredible leader. We have Joseph Munyambanza with us. I can't do justice to Joseph in a minute, but just a little bit about Joseph. He was born in the Democratic Republic of Congo, fled at the age of 6 to Uganda. At the age of 14, developed with friends an organization for refugee youth. By the age of 15, he was one of 15 young leaders advising the UN on global education. And Joseph was also in the first class of the African Leadership Academy. So we're really excited to have them host the conversation with Fred, but also Joseph to learn from your experiences about how to grow leadership. I'm going to turn it over to Joseph and Fred in just a second, but 2 practical notes. First, we'll be recording this call so we can share with members of the community who weren't able to be with us, or if you'd like to share it with others in your organization later. So just wanted to let you know that. And second, the format of this talk is going to be Joseph and Fred in conversation for the next 20-25 minutes or so. And then after that, we'll open it up for questions and reflections from this group so we can learn from our collective wisdom. So my invitation to you is, as you're listening to Joseph and Fred in conversation, if you have questions, please put them in the chat. That way, when the conversation wraps up, we can get into as many of them as possible. So with that, let me turn it over to Joseph to get us started on this conversation around what's the type of leadership we need now and how do we develop it?
Thank you so much, Radha. And it's a great honor for me to be with everyone here, and most importantly, to have a dialogue with Fred Swaniker. Fred Swaniker has been my teacher, my mentor, and like a parent, for over 10 years now. It's in 2008 when for the first time I boarded an airplane and I flew from Kampala to Johannesburg to be in the inaugural class of the African Leadership Academy. And it's a journey which has really changed my life in so many ways. But at the same time, seeing that Fred did not stop from the African Leadership Academy, which I thought was good enough. It's been amazing and very inspiring to see how much more he keeps building. And so, Fred, it's a great honor, and I will get us started. And we'll be excited first to hear you tell us about your story. How did you come to this work of developing leadership in Africa? So, Fred, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Joseph, and thank you, Wendy and Rada, and everyone from the group for inviting me here and for joining us for this conversation. Yeah, how did I end up here? I was born in Ghana, but at the age of 4, I left Ghana and began this sort of meandering journey throughout Africa. First, spending 4 years in Gambia, and then 4 years in Botswana, and 4 years in Zimbabwe. So by the time I eventually went to college in the States, I had shifted my identity from being a Ghanaian to being an African. I really had fallen in love with a broad continent. I'd come to see just how beautiful it was, how much potential it had, and I'd fallen in love with its people, and just all the great beauty of the continent. And but I'd also become acutely aware of the challenges that we faced, and I could see certain, problems that we had, whether it was people who didn't have, enough food to eat, or they didn't have education, or they didn't have housing. There were just so many problems that were common across all these countries that I lived in. And so, as a very early age, I saw that those countries where there was better leadership seemed to be performing better than others. Seemed to be, where these problems seem to be less severe. I started thinking about looking at sort of what was the root cause of all these problems. And, my conclusion would always come down to leadership, and we're spending a lot of time treating the symptoms of bad leadership, like, looking at sending blankets because there's a war. But I thought, well, what if we actually didn't go to war in the first place, or we're sending food aid because, people are starving. I said, what if we actually developed world-class scientists and created the right policies so that we could grow our own food and we wouldn't need to keep, this cycle of dependency. So that was kind of what was, going through my mind. The other aspect of my background is that my family's been involved in education institutions for a couple of generations. So my grandmother started a school, my grandfather started a school, my mother started a school. When I was 18, my dad had just passed away. The parents in the town came to her and said, we really want you to start a school. And she says, well, I can't start a school. My husband has just passed away. I've got 4 children to look after, to send them to college. But they were like, no, but you're really good as a teacher. We need you to start a school. So she eventually gave in and started a small study group with 5 children in a church building and 1 teacher. And after about a year, it grew to about 25 kids. And then by this time, I had finished my A-levels, and I had a year to wait before I went to college. So she made me the headmaster of the school when I was 18. And I ran the school for a year, and that was my gap year experience. I learned how to, to teach, how to, manage a school and deal with parents and everything. That was my first experience in educational entrepreneurship. And I didn't know it at the time, but it was preparing me later to do what I would do 7 years later when I was 25, and just reflecting on all these experiences. I graduated from college, worked at McKinsey, gone to Stanford Business School, and I was just thinking back on these unique experiences I'd had that had developed this Pan-African perspective, had shown me the importance of leadership, and had exposed me to education. I thought, well, do we just hope that Africa gets good leaders by accident? Or could we actually build institutions that would develop leaders for the continent? And that's really how the whole journey began 17 years ago.
Thank you, Fred. I think many people are surprised that you were a headmaster as well. So that's really good. Very good start. And it's hard to understand how, I'm sure you never knew that, a few years later, you'll be running many schools. And thank you to your mom who gave you the responsibilities. And she's still
trying to tell me how to run my schools.
Yeah, it's good to have someone like that. And the mothers, even if you run, I don't know, Harvard, I should still have something to tell you to do. So now that, many years have passed since, you were 18 years old, there is a lot of programs, organizations under the African Leadership Group. Can you share more about the African Leadership Group? How are you investing in local leadership in Africa, and why do you see this as very important and powerful?
Sure. I think maybe I'll just share one slide. This is probably the only slide I'll share in this whole presentation, which should help explain everything. So there's a lot of brands and everything, but if you to simplify it all, the ALG ecosystem is made up of 3 entities. There's the African Leadership Academy, which is a high school program. That's where Joseph, graduated from. And that's a 2-year pre-university program where we select the top young leaders from all across the continent of Africa. It's a fully residential program, and we develop leadership skills, entrepreneurial skills, and a deep understanding and appreciation of Africa. And then we send most of these graduates from that school to colleges around the world. The ambition for scale for that entity is 250 students per year. And we reached that scale about 10 years ago, and it has not scaled. And it's not really a scalable model because it's fairly high cost, deep investment in a few people that we think can have exponential impact. But after several years of 80% of our graduates leaving the academy and going off to college in the States, we thought, we need our own Stanford and Harvard in Africa. We don't have to send all our talent outside. So then we created African Leadership University, which is as the name implies, it's a university. So, and there the ambition was 10 times bigger. So we went from 250 students a year to ambition of now 20,000 students per year. And today we have 2,000 students. In the next 5 years, we expect to hit the 20,000 students per year. And that's a university. It's on the continent of Africa. We have a campus in Mauritius and Rwanda, and we're creating satellite hubs around the continent now and so forth. Then after that, 4 or 5 years ago, we took the view that the world was going through a digital transformation and that there were going to be new skills needed to lead, and that the so-called 4th industrial revolution required different skills. So we began something called ALX, which is not a high school, it's not a university, but we take people who, many of them have already got degrees or maybe even didn't go to college, and we reskill them through short programs, in software engineering, data science, cloud computing, cybersecurity, all of these skills that we believe the leaders of tomorrow are going to need, and even of today. So we began this even before COVID and everything. And of course, COVID has accelerated massively the need for this. And the ambition for this is to get to about 200,000 students per year. So you can see the 10x each time. I don't think there's another thing coming. We're going to stop here and just finish this. But today we have 50,000 students going through ALX, and we're training 50,000 software engineers on the continent right now. And so we're on our way to hit our 2,000 students per year number. So all these 3 entities, think of them as our talent factories, our leadership factories, where we select and develop future leaders. And then one of the things we've learned is that it's not enough to educate people and to develop their leadership skills. You need to connect them to opportunity. So the room is really the place where we take all the leaders that come out of ALA, from ALE, from ALX into a community where we then connect them to professional opportunities. Those who want to become entrepreneurs, we help them raise seed capital. We give them lifelong mentorship and continuous advice and lifelong learning and so forth, so that we keep this community of leaders together and we connect them to opportunities and to each other. So collectively, this ecosystem aims to develop 3 million leaders for Africa by 2035. And that's our mission. We want to transform Africa by bringing a new generation of leaders who can solve our biggest challenges and capture our greatest opportunities. And what you just saw is the sort of the infrastructure and the ecosystem that's coming together to achieve this goal.
Thank you, Fred. I will love to share a bit about my experience at the African Leadership Academy, but also I have had the chance to some of my students going to LU. But maybe for people who do not know, would you be willing to share a brief on the approach on the development of leaders at the African Leadership Academy, which I know still connected to the same approach and philosophy at LU, how the students at both institutions and LX are different.
Yeah, so I think that ultimately, we don't believe that leadership is something that can be taught. Right? We believe that leadership is something that can be learned. The difference between teaching and learning, right? Teaching is often something that is, driven by the teacher and by the person trying to impart certain, mindsets and skill sets into someone. And learning is what the person does for themselves. right? And so it's that whole notion of you can take a horse to water, but you can't force it to drink. So we don't believe that you can make someone a leader. You can't force someone to be a leader. But we believe that there are certain conditions that when they come together, they can, inspire someone to rise into leadership, or they can perhaps create the foundation, the fertile ground for leaders to emerge on their own, right? And so we seek to create that environment. There are three things over the years that we've learned that help to foster, an environment where leaders emerge. But we're very clear that we are not able to force someone to be a leader. And the three things that come together is, first, we look for people with leadership potential. And so that means going beyond academics. So we look for people who have demonstrated exceptional resilience, right? People who don't give up when they're knocked down, they keep picking themselves and going. We look for people who have courage, because leadership is very much about changing the status quo, and you're going to meet a lot of resistance, and you've got to have the courage to go, even if you're fearful. So courage is a key thing. We look for people with good values. Can they tell right from wrong? Do they have integrity and so forth, right? Fourth thing we look for is imagination. Leaders must be able to imagine a better world and to be able to inspire people to move in that direction. And then finally, yes, we do look at then their academic potential, but that's one of 5 things that we look for in bringing someone into our communities. The second thing we believe you need to do once you find people with this potential is you need to develop that potential. And when we develop that potential, we believe that leadership, developing someone's full potential can partly be done in the classroom, but needs to extend beyond the classroom. So we ascribe very much to this whole 10-20-70 rule of learning that has been researched and discussed quite extensively. Like the Center for Creative Leadership is one of the most prominent places that has really talked about this, where they studied leaders around the world to try and understand what did they attribute their growth as leaders to. And most of them attributed only 10% of the development to the classroom, to what they learned in the classroom. 20%, they said, came from developmental relationships with their mentors and peers and coaches, and 70% came from experience, right? They learn best by doing. Yet today, most education only focuses on the 10%. And so we're only unlocking 10% of human potential. And so we really try and, in our programs, to apply that 10-20-70 rule as much as possible. So people learn out of the classroom, they learn by doing, they learn through projects. We try and use methods of assessment that are not just exams. They work in communities, in peer groups to get feedback from each other. We bring a lot of mentors and coaches into the community. So all of that to really get them to go beyond that classroom experience. Right? And then the third thing that we bring together are networks, because we believe that no matter how much your potential is developed, if you don't have access to the right networks, you won't be able to achieve your full potential as a leader. You need someone who will mentor you, someone who will give you your first internship, who will give you your first job, who will, back you financially when you want to start your nonprofit organization, or when you start your first company, or, and so forth and so forth. Someone who will join your board. Wendy Kopp, Wendy, you started Teach for America when you were 22, right? How old are you when you started Teach for? Was it 22?
Yeah, 21.
Yeah, 21, even younger, right? And she needed someone to believe in her, someone who opened doors for her, people who backed her, and funded her dream. And without that network, Wendy would not be who Wendy Kopp. And so one of the things we proactively do is build networks. So even at ALA, we have the Africa Career Network, which aim to do that. When our graduates came to college in the States, every summer we bring them back to Africa for internships. We host events and bring together our networks. We then do something similar. We had African Leadership Network, where we created an association of about 10,000 CEOs and government officials who would mentor the leaders we're developing. And then now the room is the Uber network, which we are really building and saying, let's put all of these leaders we're developing into that room, and then invite influential people who have social capital to help the leaders that we're developing. For example, the research shows that 75% of jobs are never advertised, and 80% of jobs are filled by word of mouth. So social capital matters immensely when it comes to finding a job, but also same when it comes to finding capital for your venture, or for your nonprofit, etc. So it's very important that we don't just develop people, we need to give them the social capital as well. So that when we bring those three things together, we find that we are able to increase the likelihood of leaders emerging, and that's kind of the approach that we deploy in the group.
Yep, thank you so much, Fred. And I can talk about many, 1 million examples of how the difference of teaching and learning, the value of network. And like I said, when I went to African Leadership Academy, I had spent maybe about 4 or 5 years, building like this refugee youth organization with a focus on education. But with my colleagues, we had only been in the refugee camp, and that's the only community we had. Of course, we were able to work with the refugees and the parents to build some basic structures to really put kids in school. But it was not until I went to African Leadership Academy where, first of all, the settings of learning, it's very encouraging for young person to really develop that self-confidence, and also to really build on your resilience on how to really be the best you can be, but at the same time to think of whatever you're doing in a bigger way. So when I went to the African Leadership Academy, we had studied this program. And while in school, I was doing biology, chemistry, and math, but then we have leadership, entrepreneurship, and African studies classes, which to many, most of the time, helps to learn outside the classroom. And so it's during this time, actually, I was able to even raise money now to build classrooms for refugee students in the refugee camp. A number of my classmates from LA and some of my teachers, including one co-founder of Fred Swaniker, Chris Bradford, they flew with me to Uganda for a week to continue to do the work I was doing. And today our organization, we built one of the best primary schools in Uganda. Even during the national exams, you see us in the newspaper being among the best schools in the national exams, and the schools in the refugee camp. But at the same time, we've enabled a lot of young people to go to universities and others to start other programs. And so to me, even as much as you can see the African Leadership Academy, for example, is just 250 students, the scalability is in every young person who go to the school. And at the same time, I've seen that, we have a number of our students who finished in our programs in the refugee camp and went to the African Leadership University. They are now the young CEOs in their villages doing a lot of work. And so there is a lot of this. And another example I thought about, Fred, when you're talking about the network. So I went to the school in the US for college. And when I finished, I wanted to immediately go back to continue to the work I was doing. But then the organization I was running could not pay me. So it was through the network, from LA, Emmy, giving me a fellowship, say at least we can cover your living expenses. And then I was able to go back, feeling that I'm connected to the rest of the world, but then there's someone helping to cover some living expenses so that I can do the work. So there's a lot of examples I can give on how LA and LU is doing this. Thank you, Fred. So one of our last questions, and I hope friends will start putting in some questions. From your work at the African Leadership Group, what are your deepest learning about leadership we need, and how do we develop it? I'm sure you have many examples, and it will be good to get some of the ingredients on how to do this leadership business.
Thanks, Joseph, and yeah, really great to hear your reflection on how the academy has affected you. I think one of the biggest lessons that I've learned is just the scalability of leadership, right, and the central importance of leadership, right. So you talked about all the people that you have affected through your own leadership, and Joseph is being humble. I mean, he's now working at the MasterCard Foundation, running a significant project for them. I know, was even working at some point with the Minister of Education in the Congo, looking at how do they get 500,000 students back into school. So he's really having big impact at scale. There's a young person who graduated from the African Leadership University from Tanzania, 2 years ago, and he's created a company where he's employing 10,000 people. And I can go on and on. There's a woman, from ALU, African Leadership Academy, Julia Agudogo, who has developed a new technology for screening women for cervical cancer without using a speculum. That could have a huge impact on the lives of many young women across Africa. You may have seen the movie of William Kamkwamba, The Boy Who Harnessed the Wind, on Netflix. He's also one of our graduates from the African Leadership Academy. Sorry, excuse me, my dog is making noise. Just give me a second. It's playing with the toy. Hold on.
While we're waiting for Fred, start thinking about some of the questions you have and put them in the chat, because we're going to open up in just a few minutes to the group.
Yes. Sorry. Yeah, so really, just that's the first point, is really the scalability of leadership and the ripple effect that one leader can have. And especially in places where there are weak institutions, right? So one of the things we believe is that when you have weak institutions, the impact of one leader is far greater than anywhere else in the world, because institutions, serve as checks and balances to the power of a leader, like the judiciary, the constitution, the police force. So you have all these institutions that serve to check the power of a leader. When you have strong institutions, like in the US, if someone wants to stay in power forever, the institutions can stop that leader, right? And but in Africa, where you don't have those strong institutions, if I decide I'm going to just stay in for 10 years or 40 years, whatever, I just do, right? And if you want to just print money and the central bank, you can just do that. So in Africa, we've got weak institutions, and therefore the ripple effect that one leader can have, for good or for bad, is much greater than anywhere else. It means a bad leader can really destroy things, but it also means a good leader can really move things much faster than anywhere else in the world, because you don't have that resistance to a leader. So it's important to really that's another lesson. That thing is just how hard it is to do this work. It's been a very, very difficult journey, over the last 20 years. There are a lot of people who, and society doesn't, many of the things that we've tried to do have been against conventional wisdom. For example, as we moved from ALA to ALU, one of the things we realized was that, we needed to shift the locus of the learning from the professors to students. Because if you are looking at trying to build a world-class university in the traditional way, you would need 1,000 years. Let's say you want to create an Oxford. You would need billions of dollars, and you need thousands of professors with PhDs. Neither of those three things exist in Africa, right? We don't have 1,000 years. We've got 15 years before we have the largest workforce in the world, right? We have to move fast. We don't have thousands of professors with PhDs, and we don't have billions of dollars. So we realized that we needed to reimagine everything. And so we created a learning model which was built not around those scarce professors, but around an abundant resource, which is students, and get them to teach themselves, get them to teach each other through peer-to-peer learning, and then get them to learn through projects and doing it. So we built a whole university without professors. We had to get a few for window dressing because the regulators wanted to see that. But parents and regulators, what do you mean a university without professors, where students teach themselves and each other and everything like that, where there's no exams, where they learn and they assess through projects? Most universities have a menu of academic disciplines, a Bachelor of Arts in History, Bachelor of Science in Chemistry, and you're supposed to pick from that menu. We believe that most of what you learn quickly becomes out of date, and the world is evolving so fast that rather the purpose of education is learning how to learn and learning how to solve problems. Those are things that will evolve as the world changes. And so we wanted to give our students a menu of Africa's grand challenges, the big problems that they need to solve: healthcare, climate change, governance, youth unemployment, infrastructure, the empowerment of women. And then we said, don't choose a major, choose a mission, declare a mission for your life, and curate your learning experiences around that. Again, that's like anathema to regulators and parents. What do you mean students don't have majors. They get to choose a mission and curate their own learning experiences around it. So there's many things that we've been doing to stay true to our mission, and we continuously meet resistance. And whether it's from government or parents or including our staff, there was a time, that I had to write an open letter which I posted on LinkedIn about 5 reasons why you should not work at ALX, because we were attracting all these people who wanted to join us because they believed in that, maybe they I don't know, for whatever reason, they maybe liked the high level idea, but when they started looking at how we were doing it, we realized that we had people who were misaligned with our values. So we had to say, if you don't believe in disruptive thinking and doing unconventional things, do not come here. You're going to be miserable. If you don't believe in empowering in a learning model where students are the center and not the teachers, you will be miserable here. Because we had all these things that were just unconventional, and people were coming and trying to make us like Harvard. We're trying to make us like what they thought, excellence looked like. And so we've had lots of challenges. So that's the other lesson, that this work is difficult, but it's so rewarding. It's so worth doing, because when we see the impact of the leaders who come out and the ripple effect that they're having, I would not do it any other way.
Thank you so much, Fred. And I can also share back on the experience. I think one thing which I found to be unique with LA and the LU is that not that everyone who comes to teach is a traditional teacher in those institutions. And I found great value in working with the people who are really thinking outside the traditional ways of teaching. Most of my teachers, some of them have finished with LA, they have become doctors, others are in leadership in different positions. And if you see even the way for students to relate to these people, it's that I can be many things, and in everything, I'm always a leader. So there's a lot of things which I see LA doing it differently. And to many young people who go through this program, and I'm sure many of them who are going to learn from us, there's a lot of transformation which happens. So we're going to the questions, and it's good people have shared a lot. And Radha is going to lead us moderating the questions. Thank you so much. And it was a great honor to moderate this. Thanks.
Thank you both, Fred and Joseph. Just so much incredible wisdom that you've shared. So I want to get right to the questions, because there's so many great ones. Bijan, maybe I'll start with you, because you got us started. Do you mind coming off mute and sharing your question for the group?
Happy to, but still in my workout clothes, so no video. Thanks so much. It's fascinating. I was really interested to hear about your recruitment and vetting for those 5 excellent skills. I'm really curious to hear on resilience, on courage, on values, how you vet for people.
Yeah, thanks, Vijay. I mean, that's obviously part of it is there's no science to it. It's more of an art than a science. And we use different methods for assessing people to try and distill as much as possible of those things. One of the ways we do that is we ask for recommendations from people who know the people better than we do. So we go into a community and we ask people who know the people in that community. If there's one person here who could change the world, who is that person? And they'll always point out that person, we've seen them do this and do this, and you can start to see people who have been doing things without much support and on their own, showing initiative and so forth, right? So we tap into community leaders, and like for example, Joseph, came to me from a recommendation from someone who ran an organization called Educate, and Joseph was the beneficiary in one of these programs in the refugee camp that he was in, and he came to me at a party and he's like, we were selecting the inaugural class. It's like, he snuck into the event to see me and to say, to pitch Joseph to me. and I was like, okay, this person is clearly special, right? And then we also create networks with schools. We have a network of about 50,000 schools across Africa that feed us talent. We use social media, we work with different youth groups. So all of those sort of surface the candidates. And then once they've been surfaced, then we have to screen them We have different selection methods where, we give them challenges to do, to see how they progress through those challenges, that's testing and things like resilience and seeing, how hungry someone is to really drive change and so forth. And, we ask them to reflect on what they've done. And, for example, we asked them all at ALA to tell us about a time they saw a problem in the community and what did they do about it. And that's when we're starting to see the people who did things. Oh, there was no water in my village, so I dug a well. There was no electricity in my village, so I created a windmill to generate electricity. Or, the teacher came to class drunk every day, so I took over and started teaching the class. And they're like, okay, that's an example of someone who, So we look for those, and then we do things like we bring the finalists together and we simulate a few days of going to the academy or to the university, and through that we watch and see how they behave and so forth. So there's multiple ways that we look for these traits, and at the end of the day, we find. But one of the things that we're learning is actually that you don't have to be perfect in your selection process. That ecosystem that I talked about of finding someone with potential and then developing it through the 10-20-70 rule and then connecting them to an ecosystem, it actually works and so you don't have to have the perfect ready-made person, but if you find someone with potential and throw them into that system, it's like a culture at the end of the day, right? People are infected and they came in maybe just having an ambition for themselves or for, thinking, fairly small. And then they're just in this environment where everyone is thinking a different way. And then they start to then, feed off each other. And then you start to see these leaders emerging from that ecosystem.
Thanks so much. So you're the average of the 5 people around you, basically.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you, Fred. There's so many great questions. I'm going to try to get to a few more. Azad, would you mind coming off and sharing? I think you have a great question around how do we think about leadership in different contexts?
Thanks, Radha, and hi, Fred. So happy that you were a school leader. We work on school leadership, and we work in 5 or 6 different countries in Africa now. And one of the things we've been struck by as we've explored this issue of leadership on the continent is that leadership, I think, ultimately is defined by cultures. And yet leadership, as we talk about it generically, tends to be from a very, it's uniform across the world. So as you've thought about leadership on the continent over these past few years, has there been a way that you've thought about how the various cultures are reflected in the way you define leadership across your initiatives?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I mean, my philosophy on this is that there's I think about it in 3 levels. I think the one level is there are some traits that I believe are universal across all leaders. In general, leaders have to be able to motivate others and inspire others to achieve greater things than they think are possible. The leaders are people who are able to engender trust in those that they lead. They're people who are, integrity is generally, expected from leaders, right? So there are some things that you would say across cultures, people expect leaders to have, that whole notion of service, that you're working towards a higher ideal or you're working towards, to support for those that you serve, etc. So I think those are some commentaries. Then I think you have leadership that is contextual, which depends on the culture that you are leading in, the country, the organization, the community, which absolutely, we cannot just import Western values into African cultures, and we need to think about what is unique in certain cases. For example, African communities tend to be more, communal, right? Where where the whole notion of Ubuntu, I am because of you, and where you can't be as individualistic as you might be in the West. And so, how do you think about leading in that context? You have to be, as a leader in Africa, much more conscious of the societal impact of your organization, and how do you really make sure, if you're a business leader, you're not just making profits for shareholders, but you're reinvesting in the community, etc. So there's all those things that might be contextual, right? then I think that you have a sort of leadership that is also changing with the times. For example, 50 years ago, it was fine to be a leader that didn't care much about diversity and equity and inclusion, right? Women were not allowed to vote, and that was fine in certain countries and whatever, right? You had racial discrimination in the US and whatever, or you still have that, but it was at least it was legal back then, and you have all these things that have changed. You have to change with the times. Today, for example, you cannot lead without understanding technology. All organizations overnight have become technology companies, and you have to now build those. So things change and you need to evolve as a leader. And so that's kind of how I think about it. But there are some things that I think you would find are common across cultures and times.
Thank you, Fred. And I think, Vongai, you have a great question that might help us take this one level deeper. So do you mind coming off mute and sharing your question?
Lovely. Thank you. Thank you so much, Fred. This has been incredibly inspiring. And Joseph, every time I hear your story, I still have goosebumps. And I love the story of your mom, by the way, Fred. So I think as I listened to you speaking, I was like, yes, yes, yes on everything. And having worked over the last couple of years in Africa, one of the things that I keep sometimes facing is you get so much hope. And then you get to a point where you think, sometimes it feels like you're fighting against deeply rooted mindsets and all sorts, where people are still perpetuating some colonial mindsets, and so I'm really interested in hearing how from the, the African Leadership Academy to the, university, etc. How are you, if any, are you trying to almost address some of those mindsets that as you facilitate or teach or help these leaders to learn, what are some of the things that you are intentionally doing to address or not to perpetuate some of the colonial mindsets that our leaders might have?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, one of the most important things we do in the African Leadership Group is to instill pride and confidence in the young people that we develop. From many of the people who come to the African Leadership Academy, the education that they've had until that point has been about their country and about the colonial power. They have never learned African history, African geography, African politics. They don't understand African music. And they come to the academy. It's the first time that they're being exposed to that. So we really enrich our community with that to make sure that people understand that, Africa existed before the white man. Africa existed before colonialism, and we have, our own heroes and heroines and, technologies and other things that we have developed, so that the people start to then really understand and build that, passion and confidence in ourselves and so forth. So that's something that we really spend a lot of time in. Role modeling is another very important thing that we do, where they get exposed to role models of leaders that we think, embody the values of the institution and so forth, right? And then, also, we spend a lot of time instilling in them philosophies that we believe a new Africa should have. For example, one of the things that I talk about is we have this motto across all the AL group of do hard things, where we're saying, we have to do the things that are difficult to change society. And that, when you get an opportunity to come to an institution like the academy or the university, you are privileged. And the fact that you are there when so many other people do not have this opportunity, the only way you can justify your privilege is by doing hard things and solving big problems for society. And we talk about how very often, for example, as a continent that is, in a way, behind the rest of the world in development, we need to have higher standards than the rest of the world. Because, I talk about it being on a racetrack. If you're on a racetrack and you're in a car that's behind another one, that country has more resources or more wealth or more power, you cannot go at the same speed as the car in front of you. You need to move faster than that car. If they're driving a car, you need a rocket, right? If they're using a bus, you need a helicopter. So that you can, so we need to do, so I say the rest of the world standards are too low for us in Africa. We need higher standards. And what we need is not best practice from the rest of the world, but new practice. We need to imagine and reinvent. And this is the kind of culture that we instill in our students to say, this is how we're going to move Africa forward. Right? Now, I want to be clear though that I'm also not an advocate of, everything that comes from Africa is bad, and we cannot get any ideas from the West, and we need to reinvent everything, right? Because we need to build on what has happened in the rest of the world. If someone has figured out how to purify water, we don't need to go and reinvent that wheel. Let's just copy that and apply it, right? We don't need to go and rebuild the computer, right? Let's take technologies that exist, but apply it in a different way to allow us to leapfrog, right? So I think the danger sometimes with thinking about the whole colonialization agenda is people say, Africa for Africans only, we don't need to learn from the rest of the world, we don't need content from the rest of the world, we don't need talent and technology from the rest of the world. I think that's short-sighted, because Africa is part of the world. We need to be globally integrated. And so we hire talent from all over the world. We curate content and ideas from all over the world. But if you have done the job of building the foundation and the confidence in someone, then they're able to interpret the knowledge and ideas and the relationship they have from the rest of the world and apply it in their context, so that we're able to develop as Africa, but we're doing that in collaboration with the rest of the world, not in conflict with the rest of the world. And that, I think, is really how we need to think about it.
Thank you, Fred. So powerful reflections around both developing local leadership, but also learning from across the world. Let me turn it over to Amy, because I think your question gets to some of the aspects of how do we think about this leadership, not just locally, but globally. So Amy, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. I was just thinking that Fred's response to the previous question really connected to what I had put in the chat, and it comes from a background in my role at IREX, where I'm involved in international exchanges for leadership development, the Fulbright teacher leader exchanges. We also work on the Mandela Washington Fellowship for Young African Leaders. And I was curious to hear, Fred, from your perspective, what do you see, if any, as a right role for international leadership development, international exchanges in part of that broader Pan-African vision? I know you talked about creating ALU as an alternative to Stanford or Oxford opportunities, but just wonder where, if any place that type of experience fits into. Thanks. Yeah,
I mean, it's there's huge opportunities. I mean, one of the things that we are doing at ALU is when we ask the students to choose a major, not a mission, a mission, not a major, we ask them to center their learning around problems that they want to solve. And then we give them the opportunity to curate content and to do projects and to shadow professionals and to do research and everything around the problem that they want to solve. So in doing that, we encourage them to tap into knowledge that, one of the things that has been remarkable over the last 30 years is that, education used to be about the acquisition of facts and figures, and because knowledge was scarce, you had to go to the library to get it you had to go to the physical place to get it from the library book or from the head of the professor. And, I remember when I was in college, when we were doing research, we have to go and get this thing called microfiche. Joseph, you probably don't know what microfiche is. It's this little film that they would compress all the journal onto, and then you would take that thing and put it on a projector, not even an electronic projector, an overhead projector with a lamp, and then it would project the thing. And that's how you did research. Today, a child in a rural area in Africa has access to more information on their fingertips through their mobile phone than someone who was doing a PhD at Oxford 30 years ago. And so it's a remarkable thing that now information is ubiquitous. It's no longer scarce. And so that changes what's possible for someone to learn, right? And so we want to therefore make sure that as our learners are learning, they can tap into all this knowledge from all over the world, right? You can take a great class from Harvard or from Stanford or MIT sitting right here in Africa. You don't have to go in, and that's the incredible thing. So we encourage that. We believe in that. We also want to form partnerships. We have formed partnerships with universities all around the world and organizations around the world which send people. At ALU, we run this thing called the residency, where we invite visiting professors and experts from industry to come and spend time in our campuses. Then one of the innovations that COVID has brought in ALU is, before we had to bring everyone physically to our campus in Mauritius, Rwanda for 3 months, for 3 years. But in the pandemic, we suddenly had to send them all home, and we're teaching them online. Now, we were much better prepared for that because from inception, we were designed as a blended learning institution, 7, 8 years ago before the COVID. So it was pretty easy for us to continue doing fully online. But we realized that this pandemic might last for a while in Africa. Vaccination rates are very low, and we might never be able to bring these students back for a long time. So why don't we create a model of learning where they don't have to spend all their time in Mauritius, Rwanda? And so we came up with this new model of hub and spoke, where basically students don't have to come and spend their full 4 years in Mauritius, Rwanda. They come for a term, and during that time, they get exposed to the vision and the values and the culture, and they meet their peers from across the continent. Then they go back and they spend the rest of their time at one of 50 hubs around Africa. And the hub is a space that have internet access, electricity, and most importantly, community. And there's no faculty there, but they can teach, they can learn from each other and do projects and so forth. We're excited about inviting faculty from other parts of the world to come and spend time at these hubs, right? Running workshops and seminars and everything. And then what also happened is, once we developed that model, the president of the Carnegie Foundation said, actually, in San Francisco, right next to Stanford, he saw our new strategy and said, actually, this is the future of higher education. And you are actually leading the world, and we'd like to bring this to the US. So we want to host your first hub in the US. So we now are the first African university with a hub in Silicon Valley, right, with a US presence. So our first students are going to literally right next to Stanford Golf Course, the Carnegie Foundation's office. They're giving it to us to run our hub. And our first this summer, they'll be going there, to spend 4 months. And every throughout the year, there'll be cycles of students from Africa going to spend time at that Silicon Valley hub. And we'll be inviting US students to come and see the future of higher education there. So we totally believe in global exchange, and and like I said, we can't develop Africa in a vacuum. We need to connect and collaborate. And these are just a few examples of things that we're doing.
Fantastic. Let me sneak in one last question here. Wendy, over to you, and we'll have a short response. But yeah, let's just sneak in one more question in here.
We could go on for a long time, Fred. This has been so invaluable. I was just thinking back to the conversation we had, you and I, before this one, where, just to your point about the scalability of leadership, where you shared, and I think I've got the details wrong, but that the leaders you developed actually provided something like 80% of the jobs to many others in the AL network. Can you share that example just for this community that is all about trying to figure out how do we advocate for greater investment in leadership as a lever for sustainable development?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, about 2 years ago, we received a major grant from the MasterCard Foundation to scale up our work. The challenge they set us was to develop work opportunities for 2 million young Africans by 2030. And so we set out to say, well, the way we're going to do that is we're going to select some people, we're going to train them, and then we'll connect them to jobs. That's one pathway. The second pathway is we're going to develop select some people, develop them as entrepreneurs, and then they will create jobs for other people, right? And so forth. So if, last year we had said that we would reach a goal. We've got a sort of a chart where we show how we're going to do towards the 2 million jobs. And every year we have a goal. And last year we had a goal of, getting to 10,000 jobs. We actually ended the year at 17,000 jobs. We exceeded the goal by 170%. And we found that 83% of the jobs that were created came from 5% of the talent we had trained, which were these entrepreneurs. And they had created all these jobs. Like I said, one guy alone created 10,000 jobs, when you start looking, the average African leadership group entrepreneur creates 13 jobs. That across ALA, ALU, ALX, we find that number consistently holds. What we also find is that young entrepreneurs tend to hire other young people. Older entrepreneurs hire older people. They hire their peers. So when you develop one young entrepreneur, they are able to aggregate and provide opportunities for so many other peers. And if we have this big problem of youth unemployment that we need to solve in Africa, the leaders that we're developing, the entrepreneurs that we're developing are really a key catalyst for doing that. The leverage from leadership is tremendous. So that's just from our work in trying to create work opportunities for young people. But that principle holds in everything, in all other spheres. That a few leaders can have transformative impact on society, and I think that's really what I wish more organizations and governments would fund, and donors and everything, because it's a huge leverage point.
What a powerful, powerful note to end on, Fred. Just the power of a few leaders to enable the leadership of many more. We could have gone on for another hour in this conversation. I don't want to lose the collective wisdom in the room. And so as we're leaving, do share, what's your final reflection or question in the chat? And we'll capture these and share these back because that might help us for our future talks. But before we leave, because I know it's at the top of the hour, huge thank you to Fred and Joseph for hosting such an incredible conversation.